So we've been doing this series, Be Rich, and be rich in giving makes sense. You can pull out your checkbook, you can give more money. Be rich in serving, you can set aside some time, but how do you be more rich in love? Like, do you have a secret bank account of love that you can kind of access and give? Like, how do you give more love? It's a hard thing to really wrap our mind around, and as I was preparing, I had found a poet actually in many of our lifetimes in the 90s. He was well known for his poetry, and actually millions would listen to him just share his poems. In fact, when he would go to different cities, thousands would come just to hear him share his poems. So I have an excerpt from one of his poems that I memorized to give you guys that I think really sets the stage well. It starts just like this. It says, "What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more. What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more." You can say the poem if you know it too. What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more. Thank you for the one guy that said it. So here's the reality though. When in our culture, those are the two things that are often talked about in songs. In fact, even I looked at the last week's top 10 songs, every single one of them either had to deal with an aspect of love or an aspect of being hurt so they could no longer love. And there's this reality of we can have love to give until we've been hurt to a certain degree where love runs out. So how do we be rich in love in a place that even when we've been hurt, even when we've experienced pain, that we can still have love that goes beyond that? I'm reminded of a story of this girl named Keisha Thomas. She was born in Detroit, Michigan, grew up in Ann Arbor, and unfortunately at an early age, she experienced what I would hope that no one would have to experience, but she had abuse, discrimination, and a lot of hurt just because of the color of her skin. She first saw it on the news and then realized this wasn't just something that I see on TV, but I'll experience in my day-to-day life. She became so hurt by it that she wanted to join a cause, to be a part of something bigger, to join a group of activists that were fighting the injustice. And it culminated in her senior year in high school when in Ann Arbor, where she grew up, there was a KKK rally. And this is in 1996. This isn't in the 50s. This isn't way back when. This is in many of our lifetimes. So understandably frustrated and enraged that there's going to be a KKK rally in her hometown, she joined the activists who went near the site where they were having their rally. And as they're gathering and wanting to fight against this message of racism, on the edge of the crowd is one of the members of the KKK. One of the main leaders on the speaker says, "There's a KKK member in our group." And instinctively, the crowd rushes after the man. He realizes he's been found out and starts to run away, but he gets knocked over, and they start to beat him. It may actually have been the end of his life, except that Keisha Thomas also ran toward him and jumped on top of him, but not to beat him, to save him. She laid on top and took the beatings and took the hits that were meant for the man to stop the pain that he would receive. It so shook the crowd. A photographer got a shot of this, and the crowd just stopped. They let the man get up, even though he had a Nazi tattoo on his arm and was dressed in a way that said, "If you're not white, you don't deserve to live," but they let him walk away freely. It so impacted not the crowd, but our nation, that she ended up being on every major news station and was on Life magazine, was interviewed by Oprah Winfrey, and essentially they all wanted to ask, how can you show this type of love to someone who would never show it back to you, that would actually respond the opposite way? And what was most telling when I saw what she would share is one of her driving forces of why she responded the way she did, why she was rich in love, she said because of her relationship with God, because of her faith. I really believe that she encountered God in such a way growing up that even though she had so much hurt and so much pain, when the moment showed up, God inside of her instinctively allowed her to respond in a way that was abnormal, that was rich in love. And as we get into the Bible, we're going to see what John talks about on this exact topic of how we are supposed to love. And a little story of John, if there was any author in the Bible that was like an activist, it would be John. He was actually, his nickname when he was first introduced in the Bible was called a son of thunder. And it wasn't because he liked dancing in rainstorms in Orlando. The reason he was called a son of thunder was because he was passionate about injustice. So when he would show up at a scene and see injustice, he wanted to be part of the solution. In fact, when he visited a town in the Bible, it says the town was unhospitable toward him, and he said, "Hey, Jesus, would you send heavenly fire down and burn them all up?" So he would definitely have been part of the crowd running in to beat the guy. Yet, as he encountered Jesus and did life with him, his identity shifted. The moment he was introduced, he was called the Son of Thunder. But as he writes about himself in the book of John, he doesn't call himself an I, the activist, an I, the one fighting for injustice. He calls himself the one whom Jesus loved. His identity, his whole identity shifted from this mindset of, I want the wrong to be righted, and I want to see injustice be taken care of, to his primary identity, his primary focus was love. And so as he writes this letter, 1 John, this is actually the third time that he's talking about love. He just, over and over again, is challenging us to love one another. And so here's what he says in 1 John 4. He says, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. And whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love." So he has these two ideas. First, he calls everyone, you are the loved ones. He says, I want you to have the same identity that I have, because I see myself as one loved by God. And he says, here's my challenge to you. I want you to love one another. Unfortunately, in our day, when we hear those words, love one another, it doesn't really have a lot of weight to it. Because I can stand on stage and say, I love hot dogs, and I love volleyball, and I love the Vikings when they win a game. Like, I can say I love a lot of things, but it's all temporary. As soon as I run out of passion and desire and liking those things, the love runs out. But the love that's written here is an unconditional agape type of love. It's a love that transcends whatever is happening, that regardless what someone is doing to you, you respond out of love. That's what Keisha Thomas essentially did, that she had every right to be angry, to want to maybe not join in the fight, but certainly kind of say, well, he's finally getting what comes to him. I think that those are the things that we think in our heads when we experience hurt, when we experience pain, but her response instead was compassion. And I think John is the same. He's saying what our response should be when there is difficulty is this unconditional type of love. And this type of love doesn't come normally. He's saying the only way that someone who can have love like that, whoever loves like this, says they must know God. Now this know is not like, oh, I know things about Trump, or I know things about the stats of my Vikings team. No, it's an intimate and experiential type of love. In fact, the word in Greek is gnosko, and it literally means to know experientially or intimately. Mary, when she was about to give birth to Jesus, she was told by an angel, hey, you're going to give birth to Jesus. And she said, how can I give birth to Jesus when I have not yet been gnoskoed? When I have not yet been known intimately? That she's saying, I don't have a husband, I don't have this relationship, there's no way I should be able to birth a child. That what John is saying here, that the only way to respond in this unconditional love is through this intimate, experiential relationship with God. That we would really see God as one who loves us, and that what we would birth out of our relationship with God would be love. That this would be the response and the result of a loving relationship with God. And he goes on in the same letter, he says, this is love. Not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his son as an atoning sacrifice for our sin. See, here's the shift from our culture. When we talk about love, it's not a rich love. It's a transactional love. So as long as I haven't been hurt to a certain degree, as long as I feel good in our relationship, or I can feel good about myself showing love, I have it. But as soon as that tank runs dry, I have run out of love. But what he's saying, God's love is a love that has nothing to do with the person we're giving love to, but the lover himself. That Jesus says, essentially, hey, here's the reality of how God loves us, that while we're still messing up, while we're still sinning, while we're still doing things against God, he says, I will will come and lay on top of you. I will take the beatings that you deserve so that you don't have to experience them. That Keisha Thomas, when she jumped on top, I honestly think that where she learned that, where she got that was from this relationship with God when she experienced God doing the same for her. That as she experienced pain, that she knew that God was there to meet her in her need, that she had a loving relationship with God. But if we're honest, I think for a lot of us, that's not really how we view God. In fact, A.W. Tozer does a great job. He has this quote. He says, what comes into our mind when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Because if we're honest, I think of myself, when I think of God, I think when God, his first step toward me is a little bit of disappointment. That, yeah, I'm glad you follow me, but I wish you spent a little more time with me. Or maybe for some of you, that first step is, I told you so, I told you you shouldn't have done that. Or his first step toward us is judgment of why did you do that again? But what John is saying, no, for us to really understand God, we need to know that God's first step toward us is love. And if we don't get that, if we feel this idea of we've got to earn our way, we've got to kind of make our amends so that God will finally just kind of accept us, we'll never be able to give that rich love to others as well, because we aren't experiencing it from God. Colin's been doing this series and had a couple quotes from the last couple weeks. The first one was related to being rich and giving, and he said, you are never more like Jesus than when you're generous. And in terms of serving, you're never closer to Jesus than when you're serving others. And I would say, you'll never feel more loved by God than when you can see him for who he really is. If we can really grasp that God's first step toward us is love, that will drastically change how we encounter and experience God. You know, imagine, I'm coming home from work, and my first step in the door is, all right, Ellie and Elijah, which one of you made a mistake today? Imagine my first step in the door is, who made a mess in here? Imagine my first step in the door is, hey, Ashley, is there anything that I need to discipline them for? How excited would they be when I would come home? They would try to clean things up, and they would do the right stuff, but it isn't out of a love for me. It's out of a worry of how I'm going to respond. And maybe for many of you, when you think about following God, you think it's that same idea that, well, I'll do enough. I'll take a step of duty of making sure I get just the right stuff done, that God isn't too mad at me. But he's saying, no, we need to change our perspective that God's first step toward us is love. Now, that doesn't mean that God just stands and hops on the love foot everywhere he goes. It's more than that. There are moments where he has discipline. There are moments where he will correct us. But man, his first step toward us every time is love. I hope that would be true of my kids, that regardless of when I do have to discipline, regardless of when I do have to tell them to clean up, that they would know my first step in the door is, I love you guys. Come over, give me a hug. That we have smiles every time I come home. Even if there's things that we have to talk about, even if there's things to deal with, they will know the first step is love. And here's the thing. If we view God as our boss, as someone who's telling us what to do and we just have to kind of meet his standards and we'll be okay, our life, we may follow God, but it'll be a life full of duty. But man, if we can really grasp and get that God is, his first step toward us is a loving Father, man, we get to live a life of beauty, that it's far more than we could ever imagine. You know, we just did the giving and the serving, you know, the $40 and spending hours. Maybe for some of you, you did that, honestly, well, it's out of duty. Well, I should give that. I should give this time. But what he's saying is, man, if we can change our perspective that this is really for the God who loves us, it no longer becomes a should or an ought to, but I get to. You know, I think of when Ashley and I were dating, we were 10 hours apart. I was in North Dakota and she was in Oklahoma. Never once did I consider it a duty to spend hundreds of dollars to buy a plane ticket to go see her. Never once did I consider a duty to hop in my car and drive 8 hours to go spend time with her. Because I said, man, it is worth the cost and it is worth the time to have this relationship with her. And I think it's the same with God, that if we can understand that the things that we do with our time and how we spend our money is not out of duty, but out of this loving relationship with God, it changes from that I have to, I ought to, I should, to I get to. And John continues this idea. He talks about this sacrifice, and he says, since God has so loved us, let us also love one another. We ought to love one another. It says, if we can really grasp this, then our natural response, our natural reaction will be love in these moments. That's a rich love. You know, John, who writes this, he was hanging out with Jesus, did his, through all of Jesus' ministry. And in Matthew, there's this encounter that John has with the other disciples that I think was part of his shift from being a son of thunder to a one whom Jesus loved. So he's just been hanging out with Jesus, and this is what happens. It said, as soon as Jesus heard the news, he left in a boat to a remote area to be alone. But the crowds heard where he was headed and followed on foot from many towns. Jesus saw the huge crowd as he stepped from the boat, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now here's what you need to know of the background. Jesus is with his disciples. There's a crowd around him, and the news he just hears is about his cousin, John the Baptist. I'm going to call him JB. When his cousin JB is beheaded. So he has just found out that JB has died. And so his response is, hey, this is somebody I did life with. They would do family vacations to Jerusalem, to the temple. They did life together year after year after year. In fact, when he started his ministry, he said, hey, JB, I want you to baptize me. I want you to be here. And JB was there when he heard from God, God's voice coming down and saying, Jesus is the one. When he saw the Spirit come down. And so JB and Jesus had this close, intimate relationship. And the moment came where he found out he had died. And understandably, Jesus wanted to get away from the crowd and essentially say, hey, I'm going to put a pause on this crowd and I'm going to go have some time with my disciples. This is a hard moment. But here's what's crazy. The crowd hears this. They're not thinking about, oh, like Jesus just heard bad news. Maybe we should give him some space. No, they rush around the lake to go find him on the other side. And thousands and thousands and thousands of people are on the other side. Imagine in the last month, your hardest day. Maybe it was a really hard day at work. Maybe it was a really hard day with your family. And you're coming into your house to finally say, okay, I can breathe for a moment. And the moment you step in your door, there are 20 homeless people saying, will you feed me? Will you give me stuff? Get out. That's my initial first response. But he's saying, no. Our response, Jesus' response isn't not only taking care of them, but it says he had compassion on them. That his shift, he was able to put a pause on his hardship of his pain to really have this moment of saying, I see the needs and their brokenness. The crowd just wants stuff from me. They just, the reason why these crowds would follow Jesus is they thought maybe he's the one who will make the Jewish empire stand up against the Roman Empire. Maybe Jesus will be the one that will heal the terminal illness that's happening. And so they follow Jesus, but just because they want stuff from him. But even in the midst of that brokenness, of that hardship, Jesus' first response, it doesn't say, stepped out from the boat and dutifully he healed them. No, it says, and out of compassion, he healed them. And here's the reality. I think to have rich love, our shift has to be from our love driven by passion to our love driven by compassion. What I mean by that is oftentimes our love is driven by passion, things that we enjoy, things that we love. When you think of your hobbies, the things that you spend the most time with are often things or people that you love, that you enjoy, that you are passionate about. But that's always temporary. It will always run out. Yet what he's saying, if we can shift our focus and change our eyes from of ourselves and things that we like to things of compassion, we can love richly. Up here I have a mirror and a window. I think oftentimes, all of us were in front of this today. Maybe some of you weren't, but we were all in front of this today, and we all were getting ready for the day. We all said, okay, I'm going to spend time. But imagine if my whole day I say, okay, I'm going to go spend some time, but then I'm in front of this all day, even while I'm giving a message. I'm focused on myself, making sure I'm looking okay, making sure my shirt's, not tucked in because it's not supposed to be tucked in, whatever. I'm focused on myself and I miss the needs. You guys would all say, why are you giving a message with your back turned to us? You're missing us here. We're here to hear you. But oftentimes our life is consumed by the mirror of our relationship. So we say, as long as I look good, as long as I feel good, then I can respond to others. But we end up sitting in front of the mirror saying, well, my finances aren't right. Well, they hurt me 10 years ago and I still have a scar on my face that I just can't get rid of. And so I'm not going to leave this mirror until I fix those things. And when they're fixed, then I can show love. Imagine I say, okay, I want to get ready for the day. And I spend literally the entire day in the bathroom. that I'm sitting in front of the mirror making sure every wrinkle is out of my shirt, every hair is perfect. I mean, if I'm in there all day, I'm taking 40 showers. Like I'm in there all day, and then I go to bed. Everyone would say, what a waste of your day. Why? Why would you do that if you're just focused on yourself? The whole reason we take a moment here is so that we can go in front of a window and see beyond ourselves. That I'm still looking, but I'm not seeing myself anymore. I see beyond, and I see the needs of the people around me. That I think in order to be rich in love, we have to change our focus to primarily being about the mirror. How am I doing? How am I feeling in this relationship? How do they make me look or feel? I don't even see myself. I just see the needs that are around me. I'm shifting my focus. And that's the question. Will you live a life that is consumed by the mirror? Or will you live a life that looks out the window and sees far more beauty than the mirror will ever offer? That's essentially what Jesus did. He was in this moment. He's sorrowful. He lost his cousin JB, yet he was able to put a pause on the sorrow and the hurt that he had when he saw a need show up. I don't think Jesus is saying we just need to pretend that we've never been hurt. We just need to pretend that we don't even exist. But it's saying to be rich in love is to be able to put a pause on the hurt when a need shows up. That I guarantee you, Jesus still had sorrow and grief in this moment, but he was driven by the compassion rather than the passion. And so Jesus actually spends all day with these guys, and the disciples are with him as he's caring for person after person in the crowd, teaching. And finally, it's the end of the day, and the disciples come to him and they say, hey, send the crowds away. Like, Jesus, this is already amazing what you've done. Like, you have given so much time, so much energy, and you're hurt. Send them away, let them go get their own food, and let's have a moment. Like, that's why we left. That's why we went where we went. But Jesus' response is, they need not go away. You give them something to eat. They said to him, we only have 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he said, bring them here to me. Imagine I'm up here and I have 5 Chick-fil-A sandwiches and 2 waffle fries. And Colin's like, feed the crowd. Awesome. I might be able to take off little pieces and give a schnibble here, or schnibble there, maybe feed a whole row. I mean, well, with how much Colin talks about Chick-fil-A, I'll probably just feed him. It's like everyone would leave frustrated if I was just to feed you guys with 5 Chick-fil-A sandwiches and 2 waffle fries. It's a lot of food. If I was just by myself, I'd say, I have a lot of love to give. I have a lot of food to give. But as soon as I see how much need there is, I say, I don't got enough. I give up. And that's what the disciples did. They're like, we don't have that. But Jesus says, bring them to me. And I think this is the shift to be rich in love. As you think, even in this week, we're going to have Thanksgiving. You're going to be around some family members that have already eaten all your waffle fries. They have taken everything that you have offered to them and say, I'm still hungry. Give me more. Give me more. And you're dreading that moment when they come into your house. Maybe you have a coworker that continually derails you or makes fun of you. You're just like, I have given some love to them, but they've eaten all that I had to offer. I've offered them 5 sandwiches. I've offered them 2 fries, and they're out. I got nothing more to give. Jesus says, you don't need to muster up more food. You don't need to run down to Chick-fil-A and say, I'm going to spend all my savings to get this. And that's what the disciples were like. You want us to spend everything we own to go buy a bunch of Chick-fil-A sandwiches and fries? What a waste. He says, no, just bring them to me. And you know what he does? He multiplies that food to not only feed the thousands that are there, but to fully feed the disciples. Because you think about it, there's 12 disciples in Jesus. That's 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's some food, but that's not a lot of food. They said, this is all we got. So they're not going to eat great. But because they offered what little they had to God, not only did everyone's need get met, their need got met even more abundantly. In fact, they each had a full basket left over to take with them. Maybe you're in this space and you say, if I'm honest, I've used up and all I have left is bitterness and frustration in my relationships. That's all I have left to offer. I have pain and hurt. That's all I have. And Jesus says, whatever you have, if you instead use that as your source, but you bring it to me, I can multiply that and change that. So not only will I be able to meet the needs of those around you, but I'm also able to meet your hurt, your pain, your empty stomach more than you ever could have if you just tried to do it on your own. So as I was prepping this message, I was upstairs, and my daughter, she came running. She's like, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." And so I come out, and she gives me this, some weeds. And she says, "Daddy, I picked you flowers." And so I responded, "Eliana, those are not flowers. Go back outside." No, that's not my response. I said, "Thank you so much. I love this. Thank you for what you're giving me. In fact, I love it so much, I'm going to show everyone that I'm sharing with." And I remember I told her this morning, she's like, "I'm going to show the picture of your flowers you picked for me." And she goes, "Oh, okay." She was so excited, even though all she gave me was weeds. And some of you may have weedy love to give. You may say, "Man, I have somebody that is really hard, that's really difficult in my life, and all I have left is weeds." And God says, if you bring it to me, he'll say, "Thank you so much. I love that you brought that to me, even if it's hurt, even if it's full of pain, even if it's full of thorns. You brought it to me, and I want to change that and multiply it in a way that you could never imagine." So maybe you're here and you would say, as I think of this season, if I'm honest, I'm out. I got nothing left. I have tried, and I have bought extra Chick-fil-A 6, 7, 8, 9, 100 times for this person, and I got nothing left. That God is saying, you don't have to pretend that it didn't happen. You don't have to just minimize it, but that even if you need to respond to a situation, even if you need to confront something, that your first step in that conversation is love. That maybe there's some things that you need to set before the Lord and say, I've been hurt, and if I'm honest, I've had no love. That you would say, "God, I want my first step towards you to be, God, I want to change my perspective to, instead of responding to this person out of bitterness, out of frustration, to be a response out of love." And here's what I leave you with. When you can't take your first step of love towards somebody else, that know that God can take that first step with you. That God can meet you in your space, and he can take your weeds and your bitterness and your frustration, and he can see you where you're at and say, "I will transform that into beautiful flowers that I can give to hundreds and hundreds." And not only will they get them, but you will have beautiful flowers on your own table instead of weeds that you're holding in your pocket. Let me close this in prayer.